my guess that this won't be an usual kind of introduction. If you want to know something about Jessamyn West, the person, I suggest you read Hide and Seek or To See a Dream. If you don't already know about Jessamyn West, the writer, don't deprive yourself of that privilege any longer. I want to introduce her by telling how I was introduced. First, my son-in-law, an English teacher, gave me a copy of The Friendly Persuasion. And within a short time, I was acquainted with a man by the name of Jeff Birdwell. The man who said, the sun and the moon and the stars are the same everywhere. Only the people are different. And if you don't get acquainted with them, you might as well have stayed at home and milked the cow. Then, 6 years ago, by some strange compulsion that only happens to a would-be writer, I gathered up courage to apply for admission to a workshop in Lexington, Kentucky, because Jessamyn West was there. When she walked down on the bluegrass lawn, I couldn't go out and talk to her. Suddenly it was as if I met Scarlett O'Hara.
Dorothy, you never looked like Rhett Butler to me.
Or Juliet. And what can you say to a fictional character? Now, those of you who know me are going to be even more surprised that the next day when she talked, I said not one word. Then at 4 o'clock in the upper story of Carnahan House, I had a private conference. Now, you don't have a conference with one person talking. When I walked in the door with my heart in my throat, she said, I noticed you didn't come up and talk to me. I said no, and told her why. And she said, that's the way she understood. That's the way she felt about you girl about her. And I asked her this question. I said, I want to know if you think I have enough ability to warrant the work I realized I would have to do if I ever made it. And her answer made me resolve to buy a gallon of ink. I think I have. And come home and get busy. And I know I have. So I say to you, the best thing that can happen along your way is to have a Jessamyn West.
I hope my husband is listening back there. Thank you. I'm pleased that Dorothy Hamilton could make that introduction because she has been inspiring so many people around this university for the last year about this workshop and bringing Jessamyn West here that anything I would say would be anticlimactic. So quickly, we'll introduce the panel and we'll give them a couple of rounds of questions. And then if you have questions, we hope that you'll keep it to the field of writing, since that's the thrust of why you're here. And if you'll wave your hand, now I left my glasses at home. If you'll, the sun was shining. Can you hear? Beg pardon? You want me to stand, or you want each participant? Member here on the panel, and they will have a couple of rounds of questions, and then at that point we will throw it open to those of you out there. And as I said before, if you can wave your hand. Now, I saw yours, so I guess I'm not as bad off as I thought it was. The first participant on the panel, Barbara Hollingsworth, is one of the energetic young women in Muncie who's had considerable experience in writing. She graduated in Indiana University and has follow up on a question that a particular person has asked, and for that reason I'm introducing these people. On my left is Sunny Spurgeon, who I knew when I first came to Ball State as a student editor of our alumni magazine, and she's gone a long way since then with the United Fund out in Wichita, Kansas, and now, believe it or not, she is the president of a Public Relations Counselors Incorporated here in Muncie and is writing every day. Tom Mullen, I believe.
Isn't she going to stand up?
Come on. Tom Mullen, I believe you met last night, but I believe anyone who can come up with a title for a book where 2 or 3 are gathered together, someone spills the milk, has to be an intriguing individual. So, Tom. And on the end, we have Dick Renner, the head of the English department here at the university. You know, it isn't often that you hire someone from another institution to have them write to you and tell you how sorry they were to lose this person. Usually they give you a big spiel about them in advance to get rid of them, but in this case, they told us how sorry they were to lose this man and what a great asset he'd been to the University of Missouri. Dick Renner. So, Barbara, we'll start. Oh, there's one other person I want to introduce. Where's Mr. McPherson? Would you stand? Mr. McPherson came from Napa, California, with Jessamyn West McPherson. So, Barbara, we'll throw it out to you first. You have written that anyone can write, everyone can write, but the sometimes hopeless ambition is to be read. And I was wondering if you could give us some capital having trouble hearing you back there.
On how to write so that we could be read.
Well, in the first place, I didn't know I ever said that. This is news to me. Everyone can write something. I was at a horse barn in Kentucky yesterday looking at riding horse, Tennessee walkers. And the woman said, "Where have you been? And how do you happen to be down here?" And I said, "I have been up at the University of Kentucky." And she said, "Were you going to school there?" And I said, "No, I didn't want her to think I was that retarded." And I said, "No, I was teaching there." And she said, "What were you teaching?" And I said, "I was teaching writing." And she said, "Penmanship." And I said, "No, not a penmanship." "Oh," she said, "you mean grammar." So, what did I say? That anybody could write?
That the hopeless ambition is to be read.
The hopeless ambition.
Sometimes hopeless.
Yes, it is hopeless sometimes. It is hopeless. Everyone can write after a fashion. You can write a letter. You can write in your journal. But not everyone can write something that other people not only want to read, but will stop what they're doing to read and will pay money to read. That, I think, anymore, that is impossible to believe any more than it is possible to believe that simply because I would like to dance, I can dance. I can't. Or that because I want to sing, I can sing. But we all, I think, have an innate ability to put words on paper. And when it comes to someone like Dorothy Hamilton, who simply who could do it, but had not made the effort. Now, my husband told me after every question, do not make a speech after every single question. There are other questions to be asked. But the thing to do is to do what Dorothy Hamilton did, not do what I did. Wait until you're 40 years old before you start writing. The writer commits the crime. You do not have to be judge and jury. Commit the crime, write, get it on paper, send it out, let the editors judge the degree of your crime.
Dick Renner?
Ms. West, we have a lot of people who are interested in getting started in writing. What do you think of the old classical notion of imitating, picking out an author and trying to become like that person? Reading someone in detail and trying to write a
Being what I think Robert Louis Stevenson called being a sedulous ape. Wasn't that what he said? That's fine if you can do it. I can't do it. I cannot do it. And I doubt. Yes, you can see ways, means, techniques which have been used and which are effective in a piece of writing, and those you can incorporate into your own writing. But you cannot write like someone else. If so, what's the purpose of your existence? There's already someone writing like that.
Since so many of the workshop participants are women, and since you mentioned that your writing career began when you were around 40, and I know that Dorothy Hamilton's began after she was 40, could you tell us if you think many women begin their writing at a later stage in their life, and do you think this is growing? I mean, all these women here.
Why so? I do not think that the beginning to write later in life is a fact that hinges upon your sex. On the other hand, I would judge that men who have a greater responsibility to earn a living, that there would be more, and support a family, that there would be more reasons for their beginning late than for women to begin late. I began late for two reasons. One, I lived out in the barley fields of Indiana. I was born in Indiana. I lived out in the barley fields of Southern California, where I had never seen a writer. I had never seen anybody who had seen a writer. I was brought up and am a Quaker and was taught, do not stick your neck out, do not take a chance, do not give yourself away, do not make a fool of yourself, and maybe if you write, you make a fool of yourself and you discover that you are a fool. All of these reasons. Also, I thought it was pretentious and egotistical, probably, for me to try to write. I thought that writing was so great a thing that if you looked into a mirror, there would be some sort of flashing lights around your head as you looked there that would indicate that you were intended for this career. The second thing for me was, which was for me, I don't know, I am on the verge of saying glorious, but that's wrong. So I don't say that. I was working for my doctorate in English. The date was set for my doctor's orals. I'd been ill all year. I had a hemorrhage and was told that I had far advanced tuberculosis. So in 3 days, I was in a sanatorium, and it took me almost 10 years to get any place where, with enough well-being to write. One day, a woman said to me, as I was beginning to get well, at first, I was so sick, I could not even read. I could not read a whole paragraph, a whole line, let alone write one. But one day, as I was beginning finally at long last to get well, a woman said to me, Jessamyn, I should think you would want to piece a quilt to leave something for your mother to remember you by. And I decided that I had as well, if it had come to that, it wasn't going to take any more energy to pick up my pen. So I picked up my pen, and then, my husband is about to rise now, so that's a speech. I began to write. I wrote, but I didn't send anything out. I was afraid to send anything out. I was committing a crime, and I didn't want anyone to know anything about it. And my husband nagged me. There's nothing like a nagging husband. He said, send those stories up. So I said, I will write 12 stories. I will send each story to 12 different magazines, and every one of them will be turned down, and then you will be quiet, and I will write quietly here in my little bed and not be disturbed. Well, one of the stories was taken. I was a writer then, and no one had to nag me anymore. I nagged the editors after that.
Jessamyn West, one of the great things about some of your books, and I think The Friendly Persuasion was the one that I noticed this in first, is while they're great stories, they also have provided many of us with some insights into the nature of some pretty serious issues, such as conscientious objection. I'm wondering, can you do that in novels unless you do it in a historical period that's far removed? Do you need that kind of distance to be able to raise those issues? For if you write, it seems to me, such problems that are close to home, people bring too much emotional involvement to it. I wonder what you feel about that.
Well, for myself, I don't think it's necessary for every writer, certainly to put himself at a distance from present times to write about issues today. I am not a Sinclair Lewis who could go out and experience something today and put it in his novel tomorrow. I am going to die with 25 years of life unrecorded. I don't know whether I'll be able to write wherever I go or not, but it will be. I wish I could do that. For myself, I don't know whether I'm getting any better or not about that. My new novel, which was to have come out this fall, and I know all writers here will rejoice with me, it is written about something that happened about 30 miles from here, and it has been, you will rejoice with me, because it has been taken by the Literary Guild, and it's been taken by the Book of the Month Club, condensed Book of the Month. No, wait a minute, start all over again. Reader's Digest, condensed books, and by paperback. And it is, as you say, once again, it is in a way an historical novel because it deals with something that happened in history, but something that most people don't know much about. The very first white men ever hanged for killing Indians were hanged here in Indiana, 30 miles away. At that moment, time went round the bend. And it was a hellish time for the white men who, up to that time, it's a good thing to kill Indians. I mean, the only good Indian was a dead man. It was a hellish thing for the poor Indians who had not been doing a thing but making maple syrup. And there came into that novel, there come into it the issue of killing, of capital punishment, of many things of that kind.
You want to tell them where the 30 miles is?
Pendleton. The trial was held at Pendleton. They were hanged someplace. I'm going up. That's one of the reasons I'm here. I'm going up there. I know Indiana, was born here, but I'm going up there to see where those, there were 5 men. One escaped. I don't want to tell you the story of the novel. Nobody will buy it. There were 5 men. One escaped. 3 were hanged. One lost his mind while he watched his father and his uncle hanged. But just outside of Pendleton, on the banks of Fall Creek, the hanging took place. And I have to see that. Friendly persuasion. I had to come back. See, I left Indiana when I was 6 years old. And friendly persuasion is based upon not stories. My mother didn't tell stories, but on the feel and the language that a homesick young woman had for the land that she had left, southern Indiana. And I hadn't seen southern Indiana. And then after I'd written the novel, I had to come back and see what it looked like.
I should tell you that if you're awakened in the morning about 8 o'clock by a band, that's the Pendleton High School band practicing out on our west field.
I wish you hadn't told me.
They come every year. Barbara, I think we're back to you.
In Hide and Seek, you talk a lot about solitude and the fact that you sought solitude since you were very young. Is that important to you as an escape or a retreat, or is that a source or a time when you get many ideas for your writing?
Not any of those. I mean, I don't think of it as any of those things as an escape or getting ideas. It's a beautiful way of living for me. Simply to be alone. It is more exciting to me, the sense of a house with no one else in it, with my being in it. And there is, as you know, a lot of Thoreau in that book, and there would have been a lot more, except that the publisher said, look, if you want to write a book about Thoreau, we'll publish it. This book supposedly is not about Thoreau. Throw out about half of Thoreau. Thoreau, which I did. I wanted to call the book Walden on Wheels. Because it was written in a trailer. But they all said, throw that out. So I threw that out. I don't know. I think it is something inherent in you. Certainly you have to be alone to write. But it wasn't for that, because I wanted to be alone long before I picked up a pen. I think that I have not the ability that some people have to take in a lot of things at once. I can't, if I'm in a room with people, I don't know what the room looks like. When I go out of here, because you've been in it, I won't know what this room was like. I need time by myself alone, simply, possibly, to be myself. I like solitude because I enjoy it, because I find it exciting, transporting.
This provides you a chance then to kind of recharge your battery, get away and can I ask the question this way? Ernest Hemingway said one time that you're supposed to write when you know something, not before, and not too blankly blank much after.
What?
Big lie. Those are the explanations.
How do you know when you know something? How do you know when you
I don't. I don't know a thing until I write.
And where do you start?
I start with a word. And to that word, another word is attached, and another word. I am not a writer except writing. True, I have some idea, something has come to me that I think might possibly make a story. But I discover, my discoveries are made writing, things that I didn't know. The relation, I often think that I know, for instance, the ending of a story, how, what's going to happen. By the time I've reached maybe midpoint of that story, then I know my characters better. Then I've been there. Then I have seen their relationships. Then I see that ending is fallen. Would never have happened that way. So what was your question?
That's how you know where to start.
Well, oftentimes you don't. You don't know where to start.
Can I ask another corollary?
Yes.
No, because seriously, I once had a student who couldn't hand in an assignment.
What makes you think I'm not serious?
I once had a student who couldn't hand in an assignment because he could never finish it. He could always think of another thing to do with it. How do you know when to stop? How do you know when the story's over?
Well, I may not know very well, but I think I know. At least I think I know. And when the story's over, that this is what the story, what I've been writing. These people have reached some finality in the relationship of their lives, and you can count on your kindly editor to tell you if he thinks that you have stopped too soon or haven't gone on long enough or something of that sort. But I always am. The novel that I just finished, and that will be out whenever the book clubs deem as the proper time for it, I suppose is 500 and some pages. And I knew from the beginning how I was going to end that, and to my amazement, I did end it that way. And the editors found no fault with that ending. That's where it stops.
Have you had the same editor all the way through?
Harcourt Brace has no. Many editors have been shot out from under me. Harcourt Brace has a reputation for a great turnover of editors. And my first things when Friendly Persuasion went in there, and not one word was said to me about anything. It just went, like a sausage through a sausage mill, that book. And not until I had done some writing in Hollywood and found that I liked to have editors question me and say, why this? Wouldn't it have been better if this episode had been left out? Haven't we already heard enough about this mother-in-law, and so forth, that I like that. And it is only, I don't know how many editors I've had there. One for every book, almost, not because I was wanting to change her, they were going to other companies. Until just now, I have an editor who asks me questions, which I like. I didn't like him making me throw out all that Thoreau.
So many of your characters in your book seem so real. They just seem to come alive when you're reading about them. And it makes me wonder, first of all, if they are often based on real people.
Never.
And secondly, if you ever start with your characters rather than with a story plot itself.
I think they kind of come together. I mean, and I don't know the whole of my story plot to begin with. And they are not based on real people. I don't know how to do that. Now, if someone asked me to write, a story about, I can write about somebody 25 years ago. Now, the people in the Friendly Persuasion were not people. That even they would have been they would have been the grandparents of my mother. She didn't know them. She'd come to California. She had heard a bit of stories about them. I think that when characters live in stories are made up of words. That is when you open a book, what you see. You see words. And unless those words can convey the reality of human beings to you, and they come to you, the reality comes to you through your senses. I mean, that's the way we know the world, through what we touch and taste and smell and so forth. So if the characters seem real to you, it's because somehow you feel like you could reach out and touch them, or they could reach out and touch you. But I don't. I think unconsciously, probably, everybody, unconsciously, when you are writing, things that you have known, and I have known in a case or two. I wrote some stories about but about a boy who might have been my younger brother. Our younger brother who was determined when I was about 22 years old and married, and he was about 12 years old, and there was a darling little Mexican boy that he wanted me to adopt. He wanted me to abduct, in fact, and adopt. And I wasn't prepared to do that. And that was put into a story. and some of him, he went into that story. And I am sure that sometimes, I think my mother went into witch diggers, some parts of her.
I have a question somewhat related to Sonny's, and I think it especially applies to your latest novel. How much historical research do you have to do? And I feel this is a question I'm interested in, particularly because since I'm a Quaker too, we can both be identified by our simple black testimony.
I'm sure anyone would tell enough.
Much of what, for example, thousands of people know or think they know about Quakerism would come from reading some of your books. So how much attention do you give to hard historical research so that the times are accurately portrayed, Quaker perspectives are accurately pictured by your characters and so forth?
Somebody said, I don't know who, said if you write one sentence that is true, and the next sentence fits that, even if you haven't done any research, that's true too. That isn't the real answer. The real answer, when you say the next novel, you mean about the hangings and so forth? Well, fortunately for me, the courthouse burned down. And what was remembered about that trial and those hangings, a Mr. Oliver Smith, who was at one time a senator from Indiana, wrote, maybe, I don't know, I will say 30 years after he was a young prosecutor in that trial, he wrote in his autobiography 10 pages of what he remembered about it. The man who was the Indian agent for the Northwestern Territory wrote maybe 2 pages. There were scattered, a few scattered on the Indiana Public Library. I read that 25 years ago. I'd read what Mr. Smith had to say and had thought about it for years. I had been moved. My grandmother was half Indian. That I think I could have recognized a good story without that. But anyway, this Indian business maybe made it stick in my mind. So there not only was not a great deal of research I could do. I could have perhaps spent years trying to find out how Indians really talked and so forth, which I don't know, and which I don't know that many people do know how they really talk. But another lovely thing insofar as writing went was that the reports that I couldn't find were contradictory. Some said the Indians were, some said they were Algonquins, some said they were Senecas, some said they were Miami, some said they were, so I could take pot luck, choose whatever I wanted. I don't like, some research has to be done. There's no use having corn come up in December and that sort of thing. And I had to, when I was writing Friendly Persuasion, my father was the source of many facts of that kind that I had to find out. But I am not, except I did get mighty excited about those Indians. There is an extraordinary book called The Fall and Resurrection of the Seneca Indians. If any of you want, I don't know that it helped me very much in the writing of this novel, but it was a fascinating book. So I don't do a great deal. I hope I do as much as I need to.
Do any members of the panel have one final question before we throw it out?
Ms. West, I'd just like to know for any beginning writers, just any real practical pieces of advice you would have. Specifically, for example, would you advise a new writer to look for an agent?
Well, you can look for him, but you're going to have a hard time finding him. What I did when I began, which is the scene has changed. Knievel, I think, who wrote, what, 7 Days in May or something, he said, Jessamyn, it's an entirely new ball game. I don't think it's that new. I think you're still writing about human beings, but there is no longer the market for fiction that there once was. But the first thing to do is write. And lots of people want to write, like me. So I wrote all these years, I want to be a writer. But it's so, it's a lot easier to be an unpublished genius than it is to be simply a turned down would-be writer. First thing is to write. I wrote and sent out my stories to little magazines. Now, there are still a great many little magazines. I noticed that in the O. Henry Best Short Stories of the Year, I think 9/10 of the stories were published in little magazines, because there aren't very many other magazines publishing fiction. There was, the prize winner was from the New Yorker, which still publishes 2 stories at least every issue. First thing to do is to write. The second thing to do is send them out, and don't get discouraged, and keep sending them out, and pay some attention to, oftentimes, the little magazine editors are very kind. Will say this or that about what you've written. The first story in Friendly Persuasion, well, no, what's the first story? It's a story of a horse race in Friendly Persuasion, which is 2 stories now. It was one story, one enormous story, horses, horses, horses. And I sent it out and no one would take it. And finally, a kindly, astute editor wrote to me and said, "There are too many horses in this story."